1 year after George Floyd's death, a debate about police reform is still underway on Capitol Hill. The House passed a bill named after Floyd, but it stalled in the Senate. The group of lawmakers leading negotiations on the issue released a joint statement yesterday saying that they are optimistic about the discussions. President Biden had called on Congress to reach a deal by today. So let's bring in Senator Cory Booker. He's one of the lawmakers leading police reform negotiations, and he's working with Democratic Congresswoman Karen Bass and Republican Senator Tim Scott. Senator, thanks for joining us. Where do negotiations stand now, and how likely is it that you will be able to reach an agreement?
Thanks, Anne Marie. I am very hopeful. I mean, we've made a tremendous amount of progress from where we left off in the last Congress where talks failed. And I just feel a sense of shared urgency here in the Senate with Tim Scott to get something meaningfully done. And I'm grateful. We worked through the weekend. A lot of progress was made, and I'm very hopeful. We still have a ways to go, but I'm hoping that it's a matter of weeks and not months.
You know, Senator, in order to come to some sort of compromise agreement, there has to be an acknowledgement that the problem, or an agreement on what the problem is. And at times we have heard at least some Republican lawmakers suggest that systemic racism isn't a real thing, that there may be racists in this country, but systemic racism may not have as profound an effect as others would suggest. Is everyone on the same page about what the root problem is when it comes to policing in this country? Not that it's just racism, but that racism is a factor?
Yeah, look, we are a nation that often has words where we don't all share on the same definitions. And so one of the things I think Tim and I are working to do is affirm our shared values. And I have now been talking from civil rights organizations to police leadership around this country, even union leadership. And when you start with the core shared American values, things like transparency, things like accountability, things like simple facts, that if someone breaks the law or violates someone's constitutional rights, they are not above the law. There should be real consequences. And so we are building a bill around accountability, transparency, consequences, and banning practices like chokeholds and others that we know are not a part of a 21st century policing effort in this country. So I'm encouraged that based upon shared values, we are putting pillars into this, things we have agreed upon that show me that we have momentum to get something larger and more significant done.
We've heard several times that the issue of qualified immunity was a bit of a sticking point. It helps to shield officers from prosecution when from lawsuits in particular. You've said that qualified immunity reform is necessary. What specifically do you think needs to happen to reform qualified immunity, and do you see room for compromise on this particular issue?
Yeah, and again, this is a term I'd like to get to the bottom of because most people hear this and are not exactly sure what that means. So we have a nation right now that if someone violates your civil rights, your constitutional rights, there should be penalties for that in the civil courts. So there's criminal penalties and there is penalties in the civil courts when someone violates your constitutional rights. And so the challenge we have in America right now is this thing has developed in our court system that gives a shield to consequences. And so again, I'm a very simple person when it comes to this issue, that if you do something seriously wrong, violate the constitutional rights of another American, that something should happen. You're not above the law. So yes, qualified immunity is something I strongly believe should not be there. And I actually fully believe that in the course of history, it will be gone. I am trying to make that moment now, and I am fighting to make sure that's a part of this bill, as many folks on the left and the right, from the Cato Institute to major civil rights organizations, all agree, how can we have a nation where if you do something against our core sacred document, the Constitution, that you can't be held accountable for that?
President Biden set today as a deadline to have something that he could look at. Have you spoken to President Biden about missing the proposed deadline for the deal? And if you have, how did that conversation go? And are you working closely with the White House?
Yeah, I am. I've been talking to the White House continuously. I had a conversation with the president over the weekend. He's just been extraordinary. I think he did a good thing by putting a deadline out there, trying to motivate more momentum. But he understands what's important here is to get a landmark bill done, not something quick that's schlocked together that doesn't really make meaningful reform. So he seems to be encouraged by our progress. His team has been nothing short of extraordinarily helpful. I feel better this week than I have in a long time because what I'm hearing from all corners of this negotiation, from police union leadership on the national level, all the way to critical civil rights leaders who all understand this sense that we have to get something done and it can't be window dressing. Everybody wants to get to the root of these problems. Now, we disagree on a lot of the details right now, but I just have this is one of those moments in American history where I see the public's demand. And as we have, since George Floyd, seen numerous other painful incidents captured on videotape, which is indicative of the fact that, God, how many of these haven't been captured on videotape? How many times when we've seen people lying on their police reports and then later being exposed? How endemic is this? How do we create systems to prevent this? I feel a moment here, and I'm praying that between Karen Bass and Tim Scott, myself, and others who are part of this, like Dick Durbin, that we can seize this moment and do something that advances this nation more towards our ideals of justice.
Senator Booker, you were sort of spot on with the question that I was going to ask you next, which is really about how you think the country has changed over the past 12 months. Certainly there have been demonstrations. There has been a very sort of robust public conversation about reimagining public safety, defunding the police, reforming police, whichever sort of phrase you want to use. But throughout that entire time, we've seen a number of black people killed at the hands of police. Just a few miles from where Derek Chauvin's trial was underway, on the very same day he was convicted. I mean, you name it. So you get a sense that there is some evolution, something that is different about this country than it was 1 year ago when it comes to this topic?
Yeah, I know we tend to highlight in this nation our divisions, and people dig in, and a lot of vitriol and anger. But I will tell you what I've seen, and even in my own circles, is these painful incidences have expanded people's empathy, expanded their moral imagination about what real public safety means. That people who haven't had the lived experience of, say, an African-American male have more of an understanding that we have a nation where people are afraid of the police, who are carrying with them trauma and pain from the past, and that's not their problem. This is our problem. And so I'm hoping that the energy of this country, the frequency, the power of our love for one another has grown. And I'm not being naive. I know we are still stuck in a very difficult times, but I feel something different. This bill that we're working on right now would not have been possible, I think, before George Floyd. His death, tragic and in pain. We all must make sure that it wasn't in vain, that something substantive comes out of it. And I don't want to detract from what we are seeing substantively on a lot of states who've already moved to make reforms. A lot of local cities have made reforms. And so I just want to get away from all the sloganeering that I hear around politics, get to the core of what we mean as a country, that we are going to create a nation where no matter what the color of your skin, that we can address what has been a horrible, painful legacy up to this very day of policing that is not integrate. It doesn't have the integrity, isn't in accordance with our common values.
Senator Cory Booker, thanks for spending some time with us this morning.
No, thank you, Anne Marie. I wish you the best.